Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time. Imagine the smell of fresh dough wafting through a cold stone kitchen before the first rays of sunlight. The oven is just starting to warm up, and you're here, right in the heart of a Tudor bakery. There's no rush yet, just the quiet anticipation of the day ahead. A day where bread is the centerpiece of every meal. You probably won't survive this without getting hungry. Let's face it, we're talking about a time when breakfast wasn't just a meal. It was the foundation of the day's labor. But don't worry, I've got you covered. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is there. Let's see how global our breakfast journey really is. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The kitchen you step into is cool, almost chilly, the kind of chill that makes you wrap your arms around your body for warmth. The fire in the hearth crackles gently, providing the only light, the flames dancing over the heavy iron tools scattered on the counter. A group of bakers, men and women alike, are already hard at work. They've risen long before the town's clock even thinks about ringing. The first hint of dawn hasn't even touched the rooftops. And yet here they are, their hands already covered in flour, preparing the day's bread. It's hard to imagine now, in a world where ovens are electric and bread is often just a click away. But back then, bread wasn't just food, it was everything. This was the start of the baker's day. But it wasn't just a job. It was a ritual, something passed down, kneaded into the very fabric of Tudor life. Historians still argue whether Tudor bakers enjoyed their own meals at the same time or had to wait until all the bread was out of the oven. But one thing's for sure, by the time the townspeople start to stir, the bakery is buzzing with activity, and the smell of freshly baked goods fills the air. You trudge out of the cold darkness and into the bakery's main room, where the heat from the wood-fired oven wraps around you like a thick woolen cloak. The smell of burning wood mingles with the faint, familiar scent of flour dust, almost like the bakery itself is waking up. Breathing slowly, stretching into a new day. The Tudor bakers are early risers. Long before the town crier's bell shakes the streets awake. Their day begins before the dawn, hours before the market square buzzes with merchants and buyers. They're the original night owls, working while most of the town is still deep in dreams or trying to shake off the lingering effects of last night's ale. You watch as a baker hefts a hefty sack of coarse flour onto the stone countertop. This isn't your fancy white flour, it's often a mix of grains, barley, rye, and sometimes wheat, ground coarsely, giving bread a gritty, hearty texture that modern palates might find a little rough. But back then, it was sustenance, life itself. Kneading begins. Hands slap and fold the dough in a rhythmic dance that takes years to master. No fancy machines here, just muscle, intuition, and experience. You feel the strain just watching. A reminder that every loaf was truly handcrafted. They say Tudor bakers had hands like blacksmiths, tough and calloused, each one a badge of honor earned through years of toil. You might smile at the thought of these bakers in their linen shirts and leather aprons, caked with flour and sweat. Historians still argue whether male and female bakers worked side by side equally or whether gender roles sharply divided their tasks. But what's clear is that baking was often a family affair, with skills passed down like precious heirlooms. The rising dough is left in wooden troughs, covered loosely with cloth. It's a waiting game, with bakers relying on natural yeasts and ambient temperatures to coax life into the mixture. The science of fermentation was a mystery, but a reliable one. Bread that didn't rise was a day's failure. You pause to inhale deeply. That yeasty scent is almost hypnotic, a warm promise of bread soon to be born from simple ingredients. Tudor mornings weren't just about the food, they were about the smells. The sounds, the crackle of the oven, the slap of dough, the murmur of early conversation. This was a world far removed from microwaves and instant breakfasts. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some Tudor bakers believed that singing to their dough or tapping it gently with wooden spoons encouraged it to rise better. No, seriously, yeast folklore ran deep. And while it sounds like superstition, it hints at the deep, almost spiritual connection bakers had with their craft. Meanwhile, breakfast itself for the bakers was a quick, humble affair. With so much work ahead, they often ate cold bread with a bit of cheese or salted fish, nothing fancy. No eggs Benedict here. Some historians still debate how common eggs were in the baker's breakfast. But it's safe to say that for many, the morning meal was simple, functional, and designed to keep them going through the long day. You might laugh picturing a tired baker gnawing on a hard crust. But back then, bread was life's anchor, and its simplicity was its strength. You roll up your sleeves and dive back into the ritual of kneading. Feeling the cool, sticky dough give under your palms. There's no room for machines here. This is pure, unfiltered labor. Each fold, each press is an act of creation. The dough slowly transforming from a formless blob into something alive, responsive, and ready to become bread. Tudor bakers prided themselves on their hands. Their skill was measured in how well they could work the dough, coaxing it into the perfect consistency. Kneading was both art and science, done with a rhythmic pulse that echoed through the bakery's stone walls. No electric mixers, no timers, just intuition honed over years, sometimes decades. You notice how the bakers don't just slap the dough randomly. There's a specific technique: fold, press, turn, and repeat, that helps develop gluten, giving the bread its structure and chew. Historians still argue whether the kneading methods were passed orally or if any written manuals existed. But either way, this knowledge was sacred, guarded like a trade secret. The wooden troughs, scarred and worn from years of use, hold the dough as it rests, waiting for that magical moment when yeast and flour come alive together. The dough is left to rise in the cool, slightly damp bakery air, a process watched closely. Too little rising, and the bread would be dense and heavy; too much, and it could collapse, wasting precious flour. You can almost hear the quiet impatience, the barely contained excitement as bakers check the dough, poke it gently, feeling its readiness. It's a delicate balance, and when it's right, there's an almost silent celebration. This isn't just baking, it's a daily battle against time and nature, with yeast as an unpredictable ally. Here's a fun fact. Some bakers believed that a good batch of dough required just the right amount of baker's sweat in the air, a bit of superstition mixed with their hard-earned craft. They'd say the dough rose better when the kitchen was lively, with the right atmosphere of work and warmth. Meanwhile, breakfast for the bakers themselves remained modest. After all, with flour dust in their hair and hands raw from kneading, there wasn't much time or energy for elaborate meals. Often, their own breakfast consisted of day-old bread softened in ale or broth, paired with cheese or cured meats when available. Ale at breakfast? Sounds odd today, but in Tudor times, it was normal and safer than often tainted water. Ale provided calories and hydration, making it a practical, if unusual, morning drink. You might chuckle imagining your morning coffee replaced with a pint of ale. But back then, it was standard fare. Historians still debate how widespread ale consumption was among bakers compared to other trades. But evidence points to it being a common part of the working morning routine, especially in colder months. So, as you work the dough with skilled hands and sip your hearty ale, you become part of a centuries-old tradition, where every loaf carried the sweat, skill, and quiet pride of the Tudor baker. The bakery fills with a warm, yeasty aroma that wraps around you like an old, comforting cloak. You watch as the dough, once just flour and water, now swells and puffs beneath its cloth cover, alive with the mysterious work of fermentation. It's a small miracle, one the Tudor bakers understood instinctively, even if the science was still cloaked in mystery. You step closer to the glowing hearth where the oven mouth yawns wide, ready to swallow the loaves and spit them out as golden, crusty bread. The firelight flickers on rough-hewn beams, and the air hums with the tension of anticipation. The bakers work swiftly, sliding loaves onto wooden peels and nudging them into the hot, smoky oven. The smell is intoxicating. It's more than just bread baking, it's the smell of survival, community, and daily ritual. In a time before refrigerators and modern kitchens, this scent was a beacon calling townsfolk out of their homes, drawing them to the bakery's warmth. You might chuckle imagining a Tudor morning alarm clock, no beep or buzz, but the smell of bread wafting down the streets. Far more effective, really. The ovens themselves were masterpieces of design, often built from brick or clay, heated by wood fires that required careful tending. You learn that managing the fire was a skill as important as kneading. Because the temperature had to be just right, not too hot, not too cold, to bake bread perfectly. Too much heat and the crust burned, too little and the loaf stayed doughy inside. And here's a quirky detail. Some bakers used a test called the thumb test on dough, pressing their thumb into the surface to see if it bounced back properly, indicating the perfect rise. It sounds simple, but it was an essential skill that separated expert bakers from novices. While the bread baked, the bakers often stole a quick bite of their own breakfast, perhaps a piece of bread still warm from yesterday, dipped into honey or butter, or washed down with that ever-present morning ale. No frills, no fancy spreads, just solid, simple sustenance to fuel the demanding work ahead. Historians still debate the exact composition of Tudor bakers' breakfasts, with some arguing that eggs and milk were rarer luxuries for those working long hours in the bakery. What's certain is that the breakfast was designed for energy and efficiency, not indulgence. You watch as the loaves slowly darken, the crust crisping and crackling, signaling the bread's readiness. The baker pulls one out, and you notice how heavy and substantial it feels, a far cry from the soft, fluffy loaves of today. This bread was made to last, to be sliced thickly and eaten throughout the day. It was the backbone of every meal, not just breakfast, and the reason Tudor families could endure the hardships of daily life. As the ovens glow warmly behind you, you realize that this moment, the birth of bread, is the heartbeat of the Tudor morning, the anchor that held together the lives of countless bakers and their communities. The morning moves briskly in the bakery, but you pause now to glimpse the humble breakfast eaten by the bakers themselves. They don't linger over their meals, nor do they savor exotic flavors. Their breakfast is a swift, practical affair. After all, the ovens demand attention, the dough must be shaped, and the markets outside won't wait. The staple is simple: thick slices of coarse, freshly baked bread, often still warm from the previous day's batch, paired with whatever preserves or cheese are on hand. Butter might be a rarity, depending on the season and the baker's means, but when it appeared, it was a welcome luxury. You might find it hard to believe, but porridge, yes, that humble bowl of oats or barley boiled into a thick mush, was a common morning meal for many bakers, especially those who worked in the grittier, lower-class neighborhoods. This wasn't your Instagram-worthy smoothie bowl, it was a hot, hearty, no-nonsense dish that could keep a baker fueled through a demanding day. Porridge was easy to make and required minimal ingredients. In fact, some Tudor records suggest that porridge was often eaten alongside bread, not instead of it, especially by laborers who needed the extra energy. You can almost hear the sizzle of the pot over an open flame as it bubbles away in the background of the bakery's cacophony. And here's a quirky detail. Tudor-era porridge wasn't always sweet or bland. It was sometimes flavored with herbs or even ale, giving it a distinctive, savory kick that might surprise your modern palate. Think of it as a morning stew with grains instead of meat. Ale, by the way, was as much a breakfast beverage as water or tea, though the latter was centuries away from England's shores. This wasn't the frothy pint you imagine for the evening. Morning ale was often weaker, sometimes called small beer, and considered a safer alternative to potentially contaminated water sources. Historians still argue about how widespread ale consumption was during breakfast across different social strata, but the evidence suggests it was common enough among bakers and laborers to be considered part of the morning routine. You imagine a baker scooping porridge into a wooden bowl, tearing off a crust of bread to dunk, washing it down with a small sip of ale, then heading back to the ovens. Breakfast was functional, quick, filling, and built for energy rather than pleasure. Outside, the market begins to wake. The smell of fresh bread from the bakery spills into the streets, drawing in customers hungry for their own first meal of the day. The baker's breakfast, humble as it is the quiet prelude to the town's awakening. In this small, busy bakery, breakfast isn't just food, it's a ritual, a necessity, and a promise that the day's work will continue. Bread will be made, and life will go on. The light outside shifts as the sun climbs higher, casting long, soft shadows across the bakery's stone floor. Inside, the heat from the oven has intensified, but the bakers barely notice. They're too busy, kneading dough, shaping loaves, and keeping an eye on the rising temperature of the fire. For them, the rhythm of the day has already settled into its steady pulse. It's an unspoken agreement: breakfast is over, and now the real work begins. As you watch the bakers, you can't help but notice the quiet intensity of their movements. No wasted gestures, no idle chatter. The bakery hums with the soft sounds of flour bags being torn open, dough being kneaded, and the crackle of the fire in the background. But there's no rush. There's just the steady, comforting pace of a job that's been perfected over centuries. While the morning rolls on, you think back to the simplicity of the Tudor baker's breakfast: bread and porridge, ale and cheese, none of which were wasted. In fact, there was no time to waste. And nothing went to waste. Leftover bread from the previous day could be repurposed into porridge, used for dipping, or turned into a rustic form of croutons, scattered into stews or soups. Nothing was frivolous. Everything had a purpose. Historians still argue whether bakers were the first to innovate with stale bread, transforming it into bread pudding or other creative dishes. But one thing is certain: the wastefulness of modern kitchens was far from a concern in Tudor times. To waste bread was to waste a valuable resource, one that fueled not just the body but also the entire economy of the town. You might imagine that a Tudor baker, having spent hours kneading and tending to the dough, would relish a meal of luxury. But no, their meals were always modest, built for function, the simplest foods, prepared with whatever was available. In fact, many bakers didn't get to enjoy the full fruits of their labor, as their bread was often set aside for customers first, especially on market days, when the demand was high. Now, as the early morning stretches into the bustle of the day, the bakers continue their work. It's a hard job, but a necessary one. Without them, the town's breakfast, its bread, its porridge, wouldn't exist. And in a world without preservatives or refrigeration, bread wasn't just food, it was a lifeline. Each loaf was life-saving, both for the baker and for the community. You think about the long hours the bakers put in, and the fact that their own breakfasts were often a distant thought. They worked for the town, supplying not just bread but the promise of sustenance, of the energy that would carry everyone through the day. Even their humble meals were part of a greater cycle of work, exchange, and survival. The town is now alive with movement. Outside, the market stalls are filling with customers, and the town bell rings, signaling the start of the daily rush. You can hear the chatter and the hustle outside. But inside the bakery, there's a different kind of rhythm, one that's steady, calm, and rooted in the simplicity of bread, porridge, and a bit of ale. The bakers are in their element, and there's something about the quiet, focused work they do that feels comforting. The world outside may be frantic, but inside, the bakery is an island of peace. You step out of the bakery into the cool morning air, but the scent of freshly baked bread lingers, wrapping around the streets like a warm invitation. As you walk through the town, you notice how central bread really was to daily life. It wasn't just the bakers who depended on it. Everyone, from the poorest laborer to the wealthiest lord, relied on bread as the backbone of their diet. But bread was only part of the picture. Porridge was the unsung hero of Tudor breakfasts, especially among the working classes. Thick, hearty, and simple, it fueled long days of labor in the fields and workshops. Made from oats, barley, or rye, porridge was easy to prepare and digest, and it stayed warm for hours. You imagine Tudor families gathering around modest tables, sharing bowls of porridge sweetened with honey or flavored with herbs when they could afford it. There's a comforting rhythm to this, stirring the grain slowly over a fire, watching the steam rise in the cold morning light. Here's a quirky bit. Tudor porridge was sometimes consumed with a spoon made from a hollowed-out piece of wood, shaped much like a ladle. Not exactly fancy cutlery, but practical and effective. You might picture a baker or a farmer scooping up their morning meal with one of these primitive spoons, their fingers roughened by hard work. Historians still debate how much variety existed in Tudor porridge recipes, especially across social classes and regions. Some argue that sweet additions like dried fruit were rare luxuries, while others believe small gatherings celebrated simple spices and local flavors even in humble meals. You stroll past market stalls now coming alive with the day's business. Vendors call out the day's specials: fresh meat, salted fish, eggs, and cheeses. But bread and porridge remain staples, not just for breakfast but for every meal. Their ubiquity made them symbols of sustenance and community, binding the town together through shared meals. In wealthier households, breakfast looked quite different, of course. Nobles enjoyed richer fare, meats, fresh fruits, sweetened breads, and sometimes wine or spiced ale. Yet even here, bread held its place of honor. It was the constant thread woven through the morning, a sign of hospitality and status alike. You think about the social layers visible in the morning meals. The simple porridge of the laborer contrasted with the elaborate spreads of the aristocrat. Yet both centered on the humble loaf. It's a reminder that bread was more than food, it was culture, economy, and tradition rolled into one. And as the town awakens fully, with children laughing in the streets and merchants setting up shop, you can almost hear the collective heartbeat of a community fed and ready for the day ahead. You stroll through the bustling marketplace, now bathed in the soft glow of the morning sun. The air is alive with the mingled scents of fresh bread, herbs, and the occasional waft of spiced ale. It's here, amid the clamor of vendors and the chatter of townsfolk, that the role of the Tudor baker's craft becomes truly evident. The bakers don't just bake for the household, they bake for the town. Their bread fuels markets, gatherings, and daily sustenance. You watch as customers, farmers, craftsmen, even nobles disguised in cloaks, exchange coins for fresh loaves, their hands eager to grasp the warm crusts. The bakery stands as a hub of life, the mornings heart-pumping with flour and yeast. But it's not just plain bread you encounter here. Tudor bakers often infused their products with local spices and herbs, an adventurous touch in an era before refrigeration and mass imports. Cinnamon, nutmeg, and caraway seeds sprinkled into morning loaves were subtle nods to global trade routes and the era's growing curiosity about faraway lands. You might find it amusing to learn that Tudor bakers sometimes faced rivalries not just over flour quality, but who could offer the most enticingly spiced bread. It was a quiet competition, flavored with ambition and the hope of pleasing discerning palates. Historians still argue whether these spiced breads were regular fare or reserved for special occasions. But one thing's clear: the aroma of these exotic ingredients mixed with freshly baked bread would have been an irresistible morning lure. Nearby, market-goers savor bread accompanied by slices of sharp cheese, salted fish, or honey, quick bites that double as breakfast and a midday snack. These simple pairings illustrate how the boundaries of breakfast were fluid, shaped by work, availability, and tradition. The market itself feels alive, a tapestry woven from the lives of everyone who passes through. And in the midst of it, the baker's bread is a constant thread, a reminder of the shared ritual that begins every day in Tudor England. You notice how the bakery is more than a place to buy food, it's a gathering spot. Conversations spark over bread counters. News is exchanged, and plans are made. The bakery is a social anchor, the morning's rhythm reflected in its warmth and bustle. It's easy to overlook how important such places were before modern communication. The bakery was where information rose like dough, slowly, steadily, spreading through the town's fabric with every loaf handed over the counter. And so, as you watch the day fully wake around you, you realize that the Tudor baker's morning was not just about bread or breakfast, it was about community, survival, and the quiet power of tradition baked into every crust. The market noise fades as you wander toward the edges of the town, where the bakeries give way to more domestic scenes. You find yourself at the doorstep of a modest Tudor home, where the morning rituals unfold in quieter fashion. Here, the humble breakfast continues, still centered around bread and porridge, but with a little more time for reflection, maybe even a few moments to savor. You peek inside and see the family gathered around a simple wooden table, lit by flickering candlelight and morning sunlight filtering through leaded windows. The mother ladles thick porridge into bowls, while the children nibble hungrily on pieces of bread, dipping crusts into honey or whatever preserves are on hand. It's a scene of modest warmth, where food is both fuel and comfort. The bread is dense and hearty, perfect for soaking up the porridge or whatever stew might follow. It's a reminder that breakfast, in Tudor times, was about much more than just nourishment. It was a moment of connection before the day's work pulled everyone in different directions. You might smile at the simplicity, But there's an undeniable wisdom here. Food that sticks to the ribs. Food that lasts through hard work and long hours. No frills, no fuss. Just sustenance grounded in centuries of tradition. A curious detail emerges. Some Tudor households added herbs to their porridge or bread, both for flavor and for health benefits. Nettles, rosemary, and even pennyroyal were common additions. These herbs were believed to strengthen the body and soothe ailments, a natural pharmacy baked into everyday meals. Historians still debate how much medical knowledge influenced Tudor breakfast choices, but it's clear that food was seen as medicine as much as comfort. You hear the soft murmur of morning prayers or blessings, a reminder that faith was intertwined with daily life, including meals. Blessing the bread before eating was customary, a ritual acknowledging the gift of sustenance and the toil behind it. You sit for a moment with this family, feeling the warmth of the hearth and the quiet dignity of a simple meal shared. The bread, the porridge, the herbs, their threads connecting generations. Stories baked into every bite. As the family finishes their breakfast and prepares for the day, you realize that these forgotten breakfasts were more than just food. They were a foundation of life, a quiet resilience, and a daily celebration of survival and togetherness. You follow the morning light as it slips through narrow streets, leading you to a bustling Tudor bathhouse, another center of daily life where breakfast, hygiene, and socializing blend in unexpected ways. Here, the morning ritual expands beyond the simple act of eating. It becomes a sensory experience full of warmth, steam, and community chatter. The bathhouse is warm and humid, a stark contrast to the cool, flour-dusted air of the bakery. You hear the gentle splash of water and the low murmur of conversation as townsfolk gather to cleanse themselves, exchange news, and perhaps enjoy a quick breakfast in the adjoining refreshment area. Surprisingly, bakers and other tradespeople often started their mornings here, washing away the residue of yesterday's work and preparing for the long day ahead. And you might chuckle at the idea of flour-covered hands being scrubbed clean in communal tubs, ancient multitasking at its finest. In these spaces, bread and ale occasionally made appearances alongside lighter fare, biscuits or sweet cakes, offered to bathers as a small morning indulgence. It was a chance for a moment of comfort before the work resumed. Historians still argue about how frequently ordinary folk accessed bathhouses, but records suggest they were important communal hubs, especially in larger towns. They weren't just about cleanliness but also about maintaining social ties and enjoying a brief respite. You breathe in the mixed aromas of wet stone, soap, and faint spices carried in from nearby kitchens. The sensory layering feels immersive, a blend of function and pleasure. Bathhouse breakfasts were often practical, biscuits dipped in honey, cheese, or small pies, meant to restore energy after the steamy ritual. Here, the lines between hygiene, nourishment, and socializing blur. The Tudor breakfast wasn't always a solitary or silent act. It could be loud, communal, and celebratory. Imagine bakers chatting over crusts and ale, sharing tips or gossip before the ovens roared to life. As you linger, you note the architectural details, the stone benches, tiled floors, and vaulted ceilings that keep the space cool yet humid. Even these bathhouses were designed with comfort in mind, echoing the broader Tudor philosophy of practical living. You wonder about the bakers you've seen earlier. Did they frequent these bathhouses regularly? Did they meet friends here to share news before the day's toil? It's a tantalizing glimpse into the intertwined social and culinary lives of Tudor townsfolk. The morning wears on, and you step out of the bathhouse into the awakening streets, your skin still tingling from the warm water. The promise of bread, porridge, and ale awaits, fuel for another day of baking, kneading, and feeding a hungry town. You leave the bathhouse behind, the steam still lingering in the air like a memory. As you wander deeper into the heart of the Tudor town, you can't help but notice the subtle rhythm of the morning unfolding around you. The baker's work continues unabated, but now, there's a new twist to the story. Breakfast wasn't just for the laborers and bakers. The nobility, too, had their own rituals, though their morning meals were much more lavish, often far removed from the simple, hearty bread and porridge of the working class. You picture a grand Tudor manor, tucked away behind high gates and ivy-clad walls. Inside, the lords and ladies rise to a much more decadent scene. Their breakfast tables are laden with meats, roasted pheasant, sausages, and thick cuts of bacon, foods that would make a baker's stomach growl in longing. And then, there are the fruits and pastries, fine pastries that bakers would dream of making. Filled with butter and sugar, a world away from the dense loaves they labored over. Historians debate whether nobles preferred to indulge in these heavy breakfasts daily, or if they were more reserved for special occasions. One thing is certain: the nobles saw breakfast as an opportunity to showcase wealth and status. The spread wasn't just about sustenance, it was about impressing guests, showing power, and basking in the luxury that bread alone could never provide. But even in the opulence of the manor, bread still held a place of honor. In fact, the richer the household, the more varieties of bread you might find. Spiced breads, rich fruit-filled loaves, and sometimes even sweet bread soaked in honey. Each type was designed to match the high standards of the noble lifestyle. And yet, as the noble families ate their lavish feasts, there's a humbling truth: their bakers, the same ones working the ovens in the towns, often had to prepare these extravagant meals without the luxury of enjoying them. They worked in the kitchens, kneading dough and watching as delicate pastries were set aside for the manor's feast while they themselves consumed simple, utilitarian meals. It's a sharp contrast, but it highlights an interesting aspect of Tudor breakfast customs. Food was as much about status as it was about necessity. Whether you were a baker starting your day with a hasty meal of porridge or a nobleman feasting on meats and honeyed bread, the food you ate signaled something about who you were, your place in society, and your relationship to the land and its resources. You might smile imagining a baker, hands caked in flour, glancing enviously at the rich bread trays carried into the Lord's dining hall. But there's an old saying that the best bread comes from the poorest kitchens, and there's a certain truth in that. While the noble breakfast might have been grand, it lacked the soul and community that a humble loaf shared among friends could provide. And so, as the morning moves on and the day shifts into full swing, the contrast between these breakfasts lingers. The nobles eat lavishly, but the bakers and townsfolk, the true creators of bread, continue their humble routines. Each slice of bread baked with care, each meal made for energy, survival, and community. The sun is now high in the sky, and the town is fully awake. The chatter of busy market stalls and the clink of coins fills the air. But you notice something else. The rhythm of life here is undeniably tied to the bread. It's not just a simple foodstuff, it's a symbol, a ritual that ties everyone together. From the lowliest laborer to the wealthiest noble, walking through the streets, you see bread everywhere. It's stacked on vendor carts, displayed in open-air stalls, and carried in baskets by everyone you pass. There's no meal without bread, no gathering without it. You can almost imagine the bakers working tirelessly behind the scenes, shaping the loaves, sliding them into the oven, and pulling them out again, hour after hour, ensuring that no one goes without. But what about the forgotten breakfasts of the poorest townsfolk? The ones who didn't have the luxury of sitting down to the lavish spreads of the nobility? For them, breakfast was often nothing more than a crust of stale bread and a sip of thin ale. A quick snack to fuel them for a long, hard day. The bread might have been tough, the ale watered down, but it kept them going. The simplicity of their meal was in stark contrast to the feasts enjoyed in the Lord's halls. But it served the same purpose, sustaining them through the work ahead. It's humbling, really. You start to understand the depth of bread's role in Tudor society, not just as a meal but as a cornerstone of survival. Without it, the town would have ground to a halt. Whether it was a rich loaf on a noble's table or a humble crust at the baker's, bread connected everyone in some way. It wasn't just food, it was a social glue, a sign of continuity in a world where much was unpredictable. And yet, this wasn't just about sustenance. For bakers, bread was their identity, the mastery of their craft. The art of kneading dough and getting it just right was their contribution to society. It wasn't just a means of survival, it was a form of personal pride. The dough they worked with, the loaves they baked, held their legacy. Every crust and crumb represented hours of labor, attention to detail, and a deep connection to a tradition that had been handed down for generations. You think back to the earlier mornings in the bakery, when the air was thick with the smell of rising dough and the fire crackled as the oven heated. The bakers, Those quiet artisans had no time for extravagance. They worked hard, ate simply, and, in doing so, sustained not just their families but the entire town. There was something profoundly noble in this routine, in the quiet dignity of their work. But beyond bread, breakfast in the Tudor world had another layer. It was about setting the tone for the rest of the day. You wonder if the humble breakfasts of bakers and laborers were a reflection of their approach to life, simple, direct, grounded in the reality of their work. Meanwhile, the nobles, feasting on rich meats and spiced breads, might have approached the day with a sense of expectation, of luxury, of entitlement. It's a stark contrast, and yet both breakfasts served the same purpose, fueling the body, preparing it for the day ahead, whether it was a crust of stale bread or a plate piled high with eggs and meat. Breakfast in Tudor times was essential. It gave everyone the energy to face the demands of their day. As the day continues to unfold around you, you realize that breakfast in Tudor times wasn't just about what was on the plate, it was about how food, in all its simplicity and grandeur, connected everyone. Whether in a noble's grand hall or a humble baker's cottage, food brought people together, shaped their identities, and reminded them of their shared human experience. The afternoon sun now casts long shadows over the town, and the bustling market starts to quiet as the midday heat rolls in. People retreat to their homes or shade-covered stalls to rest. But the cycle continues, more loaves to be baked, more bread to be served, and more meals to be made. Bread, still, is the constant companion of the day. You pause outside a bakery where the door is flung open, inviting you to see the next chapter of the process. The bread has now cooled, its crust firm and golden. As bakers stack the loaves, you see the many varieties they've created: round loaves, oval-shaped loaves, and long baguettes, each with a different purpose, each shaped by the hands that made it. For many of these bakers, the afternoon is a reprieve, a chance to eat and rest for a moment before the evening's work begins. Their lunch might not be lavish, it's often just a simple slice of the day's bread, perhaps with some cheese, a boiled egg, or a hunk of salted meat. You imagine that in the quiet moments between customers, they break off a piece of the bread they've just pulled from the oven, tearing it with their rough hands, savoring the moment of calm before the busy hours ahead. Bread, even in the late afternoon, is their anchor. It's everything. But the town's rhythm doesn't stop with the bakers. As the day winds down, you see groups of people gathering around communal tables in their homes, breaking bread together in quiet solidarity. Bread in Tudor society wasn't just about sustenance, it was about community. Meals were shared, stories told, and families came together over the simplest of ingredients. It was a time when food wasn't just eaten, it was a way of connecting with others, of feeling tied to a shared tradition. And while the poorer folk ate their bread with small portions of cheese, broth, or scraps of meat, the nobles were more likely to enjoy their bread with honey, fruits, or even buttered on the side. Rich and creamy, it was a stark contrast. But both meals had bread at their core. Even in the most extravagant feasts, bread served as the foundation, a humble reminder of life's most basic need. Historians still debate whether the nobility ever truly appreciated the craftsmanship of the bakers, whether they saw bread as merely a vessel for their indulgences or as something more symbolic. Some records suggest that even the wealthiest lords understood the deep importance of good bread, with some insisting on having loaves made with only the finest grains, often requesting spices or exotic ingredients that were rare and expensive. Yet, regardless of the embellishments, bread always came back to its most elemental form. The wheat ground into flour, the water mixed with it, the slow rise, these were the essentials. And as you stand there, watching the bakers continue their work, you begin to appreciate just how much effort went into every loaf, every meal, and every shared moment around the table. In the cool afternoon light, you realize that bread in the Tudor world wasn't just about food. It was about identity. It was about hard work, community, and resilience. Whether you were a baker or a noble, whether you ate it with butter or with broth, bread was the thread that connected everyone to their history, their culture, and to each other. As the evening settles over the town, you can feel the quiet hum of life around you. The work of the day has been done, and the baker's shift is nearly complete. But the town hasn't yet quieted. Instead, The air seems to pulse with the anticipation of the evening's meals. The final loaves of bread are pulled from the oven, their crusts still warm, and their smell drifts through the air, reaching every corner of the town, wrapping its embrace around every home. Even as the bakers close shop, there's something meditative in the motions. The last few loaves are stacked neatly on the shelves, ready to be sliced and sold. But for the bakers, there's still a quick bite of their own to be had, a simple meal to ease the toll of a long, laborious day. Once more, they grab a chunk of their own bread, perhaps a bit of cheese or a hard-boiled egg, and sit in the quiet of the bakery, their thoughts drifting with the fading daylight. But while the bakers unwind, the evening isn't over. For the families at home, bread is still central to the evening meal. After a hard day's work, families gather, breaking bread together before heading to their beds. The bread might be paired with leftover stew from the previous night, some hearty cheese, or a generous spoonful of honey for those fortunate enough to have it. It's not about luxury, it's about having something to fill the stomach, to sustain the family, and to signal that the day has ended. The communal nature of bread breaks down barriers. While families at the highest level enjoy their lavish spreads, complete with meats, fruit, and even wine, it's the common loaf that truly connects the people. No matter how wealthy or poor, everyone in Tudor society has bread at their table. It is the great equalizer, an unspoken agreement that no matter one's status, no one is without. You walk through the market once more, now quieter in the fading light, and it hits you just how essential bread was to Tudor life, not just for its sustenance, but for its social impact. The baker's work went beyond the confines of the bakery. It spread into every corner of the town, touching each person's life, and through bread, a bond was formed between them all. As the night deepens, the faint echoes of conversation filter through the open windows of homes. The glow of lanterns flickers in the distance, casting long shadows on the cobblestone streets. The bakers may have finished their work for the day, but the legacy of their labor continues, filling bellies, nourishing bodies, and uniting people around simple loaves of bread. And in that quiet after the bustle, you realize that the true magic of Tudor breakfasts, and every meal thereafter, wasn't just in the food itself. It was in the connections forged through shared meals, the passing of traditions from one generation to the next, and the humble loaf of bread that quietly, steadily, carried a community through both the mundane and the extraordinary moments of life. Bread, it turns out, isn't just a meal, it's history, culture, and life, all kneaded into one simple, comforting form. Night has fully fallen now, and the town settles into a peaceful quiet. The bakery is dark, ovens cooled, and the day's work complete. You sit back, your hands still faintly dusted with flour, feeling the satisfaction of a day well spent. There's a calm that descends here, a gentle pause before the cycle begins again. You reflect on the forgotten breakfasts of Tudor bakers, the simplicity, the practicality, and the quiet dignity wrapped in every humble loaf. It wasn't just about eating, it was about sustaining a way of life. A life that thrived on hard work, tradition, and community. In the stillness, you imagine the baker sharing a last bite with a family member, perhaps breaking bread by candlelight, telling stories or passing down wisdom in the soft glow. These moments, small and unrecorded, were the true heartbeat of Tudor society. Historians still debate the precise details of these daily rituals. How much was regional? How much changed with the seasons? But the spirit remains clear. Breakfast in Tudor England was less about extravagance and more about endurance, resilience, and connection. You think of the rhythmic pounding of dough, the aroma of baking bread, the quick meals stolen between tasks, and the enduring roll bread played at every table. It was the constant in a world of uncertainty, the daily promise that life went on. Now, as you close your eyes, the soft hum of a distant hearth and the faint whisper of flour settling in the air lull you toward rest. The forgotten breakfasts of Tudor bakers are not lost, they live on in the simple joys of bread breaking, in the communities built around shared meals, and in the timeless comfort of a warm crust. May your dreams carry the scent of fresh bread and the quiet strength of those early mornings. Rest easy, knowing you've walked alongside the hands that kneaded history. End of script. Sweet dreams.